Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad to have you with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We have made it to the end of a very long week in a number of ways, as we'll talk about towards the end of the podcast today. But we do have at least two good items today, bordering on three. You're really going to get 3.5, quasi 4 martinis today. Why not? It's Friday, so let's do that. And this is the Democrats, their Twitter account, their X account. And because U.S. grocery prices reached record highs in 2025, they put the chart that stretches from October of 2019 to a little past October of last year and then says Trump's America. And they absolutely got obliterated for this because, of course, from October of 2021, when inflation really kicked into October of 2022, and even a little bit beyond that, is where the massive jump actually happened. And so you had people taking screenshots and circling it. Hey, what's going on here? And so the Democrats ultimately had to take it down. Nice attempt at rewriting history, but our memories aren't that short.
The other thing is, like you say, our memories aren't that short. How the topic of high prices, how do you forget 2021, 2022? Wasn't that long ago? We'll have some more nostalgia later in the podcast, but like this is just now. And like, how do you look at that chart and not, but when does that chart end again?
The last that's listed is October 2024, but the bar graph does go a little bit further to the left.
Okay, I was going to say
right
October 2024. Who was president then? Right,
Joe Biden.
I know they extended it, but yes, it was Joe Biden. So. Look, if you want to argue Trump has not, we have not, certainly haven't seen prices go down since January, and that the tariffs might be adding to that. Okay, fine, fair. I think probably there's more of a frustration. It's not like we've had another bout of runaway inflation. And I think the perception that cost of living had grown prohibitive in this country really kicked in right around 2021, 2022. The Biden team would tell you, this is just a reflection of the end of COVID. No, actually, it has something to do with the fact that you put trillions of dollars into the economy without an equivalent increase in goods and services. Value of the money goes down. Goods and services stay the same. Money supply goes up. Inflation happens. That's that's basic economics right there. But hey, look, they're just social media team. They can't be expected to know these things.
Yeah, I do wonder if this was interns with literally memories that don't go back 3 or 4 years when this kicked in. And then once they got the blowback, you had somebody, racing out of their office. What did you do? Or they're just lying to us. Which is
but also
possible.
For that matter, why are you giving the interns access to the social media account? We have really good interns. At least you seem to have really good interns. Actually, National Review has good ones, but I don't work them very much. But great. Like, do we just say, hey, just say whatever you want on the social media account. What's the worst that could happen? No,
no, the blame still goes to the higher ups because they probably saw the headline. Grocery prices reached record highs in 2025. It's like, let's put that out there and try to get some momentum off of that. The inflation reports have actually been pretty good, pretty quiet, pretty low so far in the Trump administration. We'll see where they continue to go from here. But the obvious jump happened during the Biden years. So I wouldn't even say nice try. That was a pathetic try by the Democrats to try and
that was not a nice try. That was
the blame on that. That was really, really bad. But all right, well, let's talk about another piece of good news for the right, and that is from the Pew Research Center, which broke down different age groups, both men and women, and whether they're solid Republican, solid Democrat, lean Republican, lean Democrat. Men aged 18 to 29. Jim, I don't know what it was, in the last decade or two, but I'm pretty sure that wasn't it. It seemed like the guys were almost as left as the girls on college campuses and elsewhere. But now it's 52 to 34 in favor of the guys. 13% still don't lean either way. Women, though, 58 to 37 in that demographic, which is the largest gap of men or women in any age group. But men are double digits to the right in every one. Again, 52-34 for the youngest voters, 51-41 for 30 to 49. Men 50 to 64, 56 to 37 in favor of the right. Gen X doing some heavy lifting yet again. Women in Gen X, dead even, 46-46. 65 plus men, 54-40 in favor of the Republicans, and women, all again very close, 47-44 in favor of the Democrats. Women between 30 and 49, 14 points in favor of the Dems, 53 to 39. So, Jim, it's the ladies under 50 who are keeping these elections close.
They are, and right now I can hear a chunk of our listeners probably saying, this is because the government has taken the role of the male provider in a lot of a relationship. We'll get to that in a second. Trust me, I know, but I know there's a whole bunch of guys like that that's like jumping on their last nerve. It's interesting. We've talked about since the 2024 election, Democrats have said, how do we appeal more to young males? Why are young males growing more conservative? Why are they voting in higher numbers for the Republican Party? And they've said, why can't we find our own Joe Rogan? Never mind that a couple of years ago, there was a guy, who was supporting Bernie Sanders named Joe Rogan. So they had one, and they not only did they drove Joe Rogan, there are a whole bunch of these podcasters who are, I would argue, not necessarily, or at least as of a couple of years ago, were not down the line Republicans. Certainly not traditional. They were not quoting William F. Buckley, that kind of stuff. But there was kind of this libertarianish, leave me alone, sports, girls, pop culture, vibe to it. But they kind of recognized that what was coming from the Democratic Party was this demonization of men, this constant talk about toxic masculinity, that the idea if you were a young man, there was inherently something wrong with you. All right. The other thing that came out this week, which drove people crazy, was this New York Times long first-person essay, "The Trouble with Wanting Men" by Jean Garnett, developing the concept of heterofatalism. And the idea is that if you're a woman, men are just so frustrating, and it's very hard to have a happy heterosexual relationship if you are simultaneously trying to fight the patriarchy in all of its forms and constantly on guard for anything that could be construed as heteronormative, or if you believe that men and women are different, how could you possibly have a happy relationship? Well, lots of people do. It's not an inherent. The fact that they're different doesn't mean that necessarily one is better than the other, or that one always has to be in charge. Figure out what works for you and your spouse, and it'll probably be fine. I think My Big Fat Greek Wedding, the argument that the man is the head of the house, and then the mother saying, yes, but the wife is the neck, and she determines the direction that the head is facing it. I suspect there are a lot of married couples who would say, that really there is this partnership, that there really is this perception of the male running things is not always the way there's often a little more subtle nuance to that than things are. But this essay, "The Trouble with Wanting Men," just seems like this classic of the genre of blaming the men today for the problems in all relationships. That there's no taking of responsibility. There's no sense that if you're constantly having unhappy relationships with men, maybe it has something to do with the men you're dating. Maybe you keep picking a particular type of guy who's not going to be able to meet your needs in the way that you want. But I also just kind of feel like that there is this culture of anxiety, depression, frustration, some might say irresponsibility, some might say constant blame shifting, flourishing in that. And just look at whatever young women's media you prefer. Teen Vogue, the New York Times Magazine section, whatever. Look at the way they talk about relationships, and then go onto these podcasts and YouTube shows and see how they talk about relationships. And they're completely different. The male shows are very often, this is like, hey, this is how you get your life together. Jordan Peterson, very much, go clean your room. This idea of empowerment. It's up to you to make your life better. Whereas, again, I'm not the target audience, but a lot of these programs, targeting at women, are very much about how everything is terrible and none of it is your fault. And this mentality of victimhood and all that stuff. So I look at this and I'm like, well, I'm not surprised things are shaking out this way. And if you're looking for the Democratic Party to tell you, the Democratic Party's message is you need us. You need government to help you out. You can't make it on your own. The Republican Party, with some exceptions, has very much been, the government's not there to make your life better. The government's not there to fix every little problem. You're supposed to do that. That's what freedom's all about. That's what responsibility is about. Go out there, kick the ass of the world, go do great, you'll be fine. And it's not surprising that each gender would be gravitating towards a particular party. I think it's a formula for a lot of disappointed Democrats and, of course, like by extension, a lot of disappointed women.
Yeah, and there have been polls over the years showing that single women lean far more to the left than married women. Hillary Clinton, of course, would chalk that up to, you're just doing what your husbands are telling you to do.
Yes.
Or, hear me out, maybe those men married people who think similarly to them on various political issues. It's just possible that they figured that they had some things in common before they got married. I'm just spitballing here, Jim.
Yeah, do you think Hillary always does what Bill wants? Just color me skeptical. I just got this vibe. I don't know.
Overall, it's +1 for Republicans right now nationwide. It used to be +6 for the Democrats. So definitely a little bit of a shift going on here. All right. Talking about a shift, maybe it's time for a little more skincare, especially if you're a guy and maybe you're starting to see some lines on your face when you look in the mirror in the morning. But most guys' skin products just don't work great. But Caldera Labs high-performance skincare is made just for men, simple, effective, and backed by science.
You know, Greg, I'm sure someone out there is going to say that this podcast is very sexist and also very heteronormative because we're a bunch of heteronormative guys. But why are they always talking about men's skincare? Well, it's because of just how good Caldera Lab is. It's an award-winning serum with 27 botanicals and powerful antioxidants to protect against daily stressors. The eye serum targets dark circles, puffiness, and tired eyes with peptides and adaptogens. The base layer is a lightweight moisturizer with plant stem cells and snow mushroom for deep hydration and a matte finish. And yes, these are products that are formulated for men. It's not sexism. It's just that they're created by expert cosmetic chemists who specialize in men's skincare.
Yeah, exactly. And so I've tried the cleanser. I think it works great. It's very thorough. The skin feels fresh and clean when you're done. Skincare doesn't have to be complicated, but it should be good. Upgrade your routine with Caldera Lab and see the difference for yourself. Go to calderalab.com/3ml and use 3ml at checkout for 20% off your first order. All right, Jim. Quasi-good martini here, double-fisted, in fact. We go to the Middle East. Here's the bad part. Hat tip to Town Hall for this one. French President Emmanuel Macron announcing Thursday that France will recognize Palestine as a state at the UN General Assembly in September. Quote, consistent with its historic commitment to a just and lasting peace in the Middle East, I have decided that France will recognize the state of Palestine, Macron wrote on X. Quote, the urgent priority today is to end the war in Gaza and to bring relief to the civilian population. Peace is possible. But he got plenty of blowback here, including from Benjamin Netanyahu, who says, we strongly condemn President Macron's decision to recognize a Palestinian state next to Tel Aviv in the wake of the October 7th massacre. Such a move rewards terror and risks creating another Iranian proxy, just as Gaza became. A Palestinian state in these conditions would be a launch pad to annihilate Israel, not to live in peace beside it. Meanwhile, the effort to get that ceasefire in the Middle East has completely fallen apart. Mediators from Egypt and even Qatar basically told Hamas their latest offer was ridiculous. The Times of Israel saying, mediators last week were bullish about the chances of an imminent agreement after Israel came down from some of its demands. But upon reviewing Hamas's response, Egyptian and Qatari mediators told Hamas they would not even present it to the U.S. Special Envoy in the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. Witkoff, for his part now, has told his negotiators to leave. This is pointless. And so here we are again. So Emmanuel Macron still I guess looking at rainbows and unicorns there in his office, Jim. But in terms of reality and the idea that Hamas actually wants peace in the Middle East, these people are still in dreamland.
So I am not always the biggest fan of Mike Huckabee, the current U.S. ambassador to Israel, but I did like his response to this. He says, you know what, actually, we'd be open to a Palestinian state as well. Why don't we put it right in the French Riviera? You like that? You want to do that there? And obviously, no one in France thinks that's a good idea. It's always, yes, there should be a state, and you guys give up the land for it. We just going to cheer from it over here. In the second part, I have taken to the habit in the last few months of referring to our chief presidential envoy as Steve, maybe Hamas duped me, Witkoff, being very underwhelmed with his first round of negotiations and his subsequent excuse that he thought he had to deal with Hamas. And then, Greg, I'm glad you're sitting down so you're ready for this. It turns out Hamas was not being honest, was not negotiating in good faith. And when push came to shove, they backed away from the promises they had made. Again, to think, in terms of his negotiations with Russia, I've had a great deal of frustration with Witkov, and he comes across as a guy who seems to think because he handled big budget, real estate deals in New York City, he's prepared to handle some of the thorniest and most difficult negotiations in U.S. foreign policy all around the globe. But I guess I'm kind of coming around, not just because of this statement, which I think he's just being very blunt in saying that Hamas is not negotiating in good faith. I think it does kind of reach the point where when even Steve Witkov says you can't be trusted and can't reach a deal with you, like Hamas, you're never going to find an easier negotiator than Steve Witkov. If you can't if you can't convince him that you've got a reasonable offer on the table, then you can't convince anybody. And nobody in the Middle East thinks you're doing it seriously. So by that standard, Steve Witkov, actually, maybe he is the right guy to send to this, almost as a litmus test to see, is this person a good faith negotiator, and are they serious, and do they want to get a deal? My sneaking suspicion is that a bunch of these figures, Hamas, Vladimir Putin, don't want a deal. They want to keep fighting, but they want to appear reasonable, which is why they will show up for the negotiations. We just can't seem to get there. Either way, good for you, Witkov, to getting it, a little bit late, but for calling it as it is and for using it in really blunt language. I guess that's another advantage of not having a career diplomat to, express great disappointment in a pinstriped suit or something like that. That, Witkov comes out and says this is getting ridiculous and infuriating. So a rare case of good for you, Witkov. Maybe U.S. diplomatic efforts will be more productive just as a realistic expectations and a recognition that not everybody in the globe is a good faith negotiator.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen at the UN. I'm sure that crowd's going to be pretty supportive of Macron's idea here. Macron says he's, hashed out this idea with Mahmoud Abbas, with, the Palestinian Authority. He hasn't been negotiating with Hamas, but good luck getting anywhere close to a resolution on that without involving Hamas or anything like that. So, I mean, it's just all you're doing is killing more trees with papers here, as far as I can tell here, until they actually get serious about allowing Israel to exist and renouncing terrorism, which they won't do. They won't even pretend to do it, but they definitely won't do it for real. And so until that point, why even bother?
Is college even worth it anymore? The Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski. Every day, Chris helps unpack the connection between politics and the economy and how it affects your wallet. Young male college grads are jobless at the same rate as non-grads. If the conventional wisdom is that it's easier to get a job, they lied to you there. Be smart with your choices. Whether it's happening in D.C. or down on Wall Street, it's affecting you financially. Be informed. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, on to our final martini of the day and the week. And Jim, I haven't checked my social media feed since we started recording here, but hopefully no more prominent celebrity from the 80s has died. This has been a terrible week for Gen X, with 3 very prominent deaths. It started with the shocking news that Malcolm Jamal Warner, who played Theo Huxtable on The Cosby Show, drowned while on vacation in Costa Rica over last weekend, just 54 years old. As odious as Bill Cosby's reputation is now, there are still some just absolutely classic clips from that show, including the one where Theo said it didn't matter where he got good grades. And if you haven't seen the clips on that, it's just absolutely fantastic. Then it was just a day or two later that we found out that Ozzy Osbourne died after, just a couple weeks after his final concert. He had been battling Parkinson's disease. I'm not sure if that was the official cause, but I'm sure it was a factor. He was 76 years old. And then yesterday, we're all shocked, especially us 80s kids, on the passing of Hulk Hogan from cardiac arrest at the age of 71. I mean, talk about a cultural phenomenon for over 40 years. I mean, Hulk Hogan came up as a wrestler. He was already pretty prominent from the early 80s because by 1982, I believe it was, he was Thunder Lips in Rocky 3. And soon he was the face of the WWF, which was their name before the World Wildlife Fund tried to sue him. And so they changed it to WWE. But then Hogan becomes the champ. You get the whole Hulkamania thing, the red, white, and blue, the train, say your prayers, eat your vitamins. And then, of course, there's the epic showdown in WrestleMania 3 against Andre the Giant. And I'm sure you've seen the clips, if you're into this story at all, of him lifting up Andre the Giant and slamming him to the canvas and then dropping the leg to get the pin in just an incredible moment. I mean, everybody talks about how wrestling is fake. I was into it very much for about 3 years, and that was part of that era. You don't fake picking up Andre the Giant and slamming him down. That was just an incredible moment, but an absolute cultural phenomenon in a number of ways. In that era, when Hogan was the champ and the face of the WWF for so long. My friend Brad and I went to a store in town because I was looking for those Hulkamania t-shirts that he'd always rip as he entered the ring. My mom did not like the idea of me ripping shirts, so there's no way that was going to happen with my existing wardrobe. So I go into this store asking if he sells Hulkamania t-shirts. And of course, Hulk Hogan's got the 24-inch pythons. Jim, I had about 3-inch pythons, if that. And so
you had some garden snakes.
This guy just absolutely loses it laughing. He I think that made his week. He did not sell them, unfortunately, but just a little taste of what Hulkamania was like in our little town. And there are people our age and beyond who are thinking about so many different things with the passing of Hulk Hogan, and we'll talk in a moment about his moment from last summer.
Well, I just want to point out, Greg, that when, Hulk Hogan lifted up and threw Andre the Giant, a lot of people said that was the single most devastating blow that Hulk Hogan dealt out to anybody in his entire career. The first, of course, being taking down the website Gawker. I'll allude to a bit more to that later about the idea of these Generation X figures who stars of the 80s who ended up coming back later in life. It's strange, the passing of Malcolm Jamal Warner, best known as Theo. I found myself that hit me on a level I didn't expect it to. Because if I say to you, Greg, Denise, you know exactly what I'm thinking. And like half of our listeners are like, oh God, the shirt episode,
yes,
right? Where he wanted this fancy designer, was it Pierre Cardrel or whatever, this fancy, and Denise is like, oh, I can make you it. And she makes the most ridiculous looking shirt of all time. And he goes out and the girl he wants to impress is in the living room and he's flipping out and she likes it. She thinks it's by some other, One of the things that you and I, being the ages that we are, have witnessed is the era of the monoculture when we were kids and teens and growing up, the arrival of the internet, and then kind of the end of that era. And look, there are a lot of advantages to having a podcast with two guys, and it's more than just 3 television networks. You can find anything on the internet. You can find anything on YouTube. Amazon sells a bazillion books. Like, there are a lot of really big advantages to this. But one of them is we don't have that kind of shared thing where you go into school, you go into the office, and everybody else was talking about that, or who shot JR, or who killed Laura Palmer, or any of these things. And The Cosby Show, look, Bill Cosby's a rat bastard who did all kinds of terrible things, but The Cosby Show stands out as arguably the greatest family sitcom of all time. And it was, 8 o'clock on Thursday nights, you were watching NBC, and it was just this lovely, enjoyable portrayal of American life. People talk about what a landmark it was for a portrayal of a successful African-American family. Dad's a doctor, mom's a lawyer. But I think also just the sheer universal element of it, the degree to which people could recognize, oh God, my mom had a look that that was like Claire Huxtable, yes, where if you messed up, or your dad's exasperation, or bickering with your siblings, just like all of that just felt so relatable. Malcolm Jamal Warner remained as a working actor throughout all the years, and I'm sure he probably made a bundle all the years of the Cosby Show, so he didn't necessarily need to. So in Community, he appears, he's wearing a very bright, colorful sweater, and one of the other characters says, hey, nice sweater. He's like, yeah, I got it from my dad. Nice little shout out to the Cosby Show on Community there. So Ozzy Osbourne, I can't say I was a diehard fan of his kind of metal music in the 80s. But I will point out, though, when he came back as a reality star on the Osbournes, I think there's something about watching these celebrities who had a certain rebellious, unstoppable image in their youth, and then they come back and you see them, and the depressing but universally recognized middle age comes for us all, and the degree to which he was obviously dealing with some hearing issues, and Sharon, this kind of general, like, hard living had taken a toll on him, and the degree to which everybody who worked with him, Donny Osmond talked about how great it was to work with him. All these other guys who were completely at odds with the bat eating, which, by the way, looking back from the perspective of COVID, wasn't that dangerous, Greg, to bite the head off a bat? There was something, particularly as this portrayal, and you watch his relationship with Sharon and his relationship with his kids, there was a sweetness there. There was a recognition that here's a guy who was like, blah, I am here to destroy mainstream white bread Christian America. And then he comes out to be kind of his own kind of sitcom dad. So, you and I talk about, and we kind of joke about the idea that in our minds, Die Hard is a Christmas movie that came out just a few years ago. The 80s were just a little while ago. The 90s weren't that long ago. And this recognition that, like, okay, yes, technically, allegedly, some of us are in the neighborhood of 50 years old, and that the 80s were 40 years ago. And that doesn't seem possible. And when you see so many of these big figures from your childhood passing into the next world, it is a reminder that it is. And it's unfortunate. Those of us who lived through it, it was a special time. I think we that grew up in the 80s have this advantage. And it's said that if you grew up in this, if you remember the 70s, then you weren't really there.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe, but 1985 is now halfway between us and the end of World War II, and that means it's a long time ago now, 40 years. Now, the interesting thing about Ozzy, I think that's one of the few marriages that didn't blow up as a result of having their own reality TV show. You had Jessica Simpson and Nick Lachey. Hulk Hogan's marriage didn't last that one. You had John and Kate. You had the Palins had their own. Even I think the Duggars are still together, but they've certainly had their issues over time. And it's just odd that they were the ones to make it, but good for them, obviously. But then the Hulk Hogan last year, of course, was at the Republican National Convention, which honestly, other than maybe Trump embracing the fire coat of Corey Comparator in the beginning of his speech, Hogan earlier that night was probably the one that got the most clicks and the most retweets and everything else over the next couple of days. Here's how that went down.
But what happened last week when they took a shot at my hero and they tried to kill the next president of the United States? Enough was enough, and I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
Oh, man. And of course, Trump's no stranger to the wrestling world either. He was loving every second of that. And Jim, I hate to be even more of a downer, but we also got news this week that Phil Collins is not doing well. The rumors, I believe, this morning that he's in hospice were untrue. So thankfully, that's not getting that bad. But we also learned this week that our beloved Bruce Willis from Die Hard, his dementia has progressed to the point where he can't speak or read and now has even trouble walking. So it's just an era that's getting further and further in the rearview mirror, even if it doesn't seem that way.
You find yourself wanting to put a protective bubble wrap around Mr. T, Michael J. Fox, and I'm probably thinking I'm forgetting some other ones. The darkest day for us 80s kids since Optimus Prime died. The other thing I'm just going to observe is that, like, watching that footage of Hulk Hogan, we're now at an age where a decent number of people who cover politics are in the ballpark of our age. Some people would argue that, Greg, you and I are on the older side of people covering politics. But for even if you were like a diehard progressive liberal, every guy who was a kid in the 80s watched that segment and said, oh, that was awesome. Yeah. Politics disappeared. And the funny, you look at that, you would have thought Hulk Hogan would have lived decades and decades. That he just looked like he was so full of energy and full of life and just shocking. And just kind of this recognition, again, I think by the end of it, people having enjoyed all the stages of Hulk Hogan's career, you want to talk about a guy who, figured out who he was and what he stands for and knew that not everybody was going to like him. He talked about his faith, and perhaps that's why he called everybody brother. But this sense of the degree to which he certainly seemed like a man utterly comfortable with who he was. He figured out who he was, what he wanted to do, what he was supposed to be doing on this earth. And I think by his own measures, you'd say he did it pretty darn well. So we're talking about, three figures who will be missed and who definitely left their mark in the world about as much as anybody could.
Jim, on that somber note, have a terrific weekend, and I'll see you again on Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Columbus of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Columbus. Have a fantastic weekend. Join us again Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.